Now that I'm done grading some of the bigger name running backs in the 2017 draft class, I'm going to move on to the wide receivers. And of course, there will be more quarterback scouting videos to come in the weeks ahead and running backs as well. But as I've explained before, I'm trying to go through and hit a few of the big names at each position, then come through and do the second wave, then come through and do the third wave and see how many prospects I can get through. But we're on to the wide receivers for now. And the first wave of wide receivers is going to be a total of 6 of them. My initial impressions of this class are it doesn't quite measure up to some of the previous drafts. Certainly doesn't measure up to the 2014 class, that's for sure, because I don't know if any wide receiver class is ever going to measure up to that one. But there is some talent to be had. And typically, when you look at the wide receiver position, your wide receivers fit into 3 different categories. You have those flankers, the number 1 type of wide receivers, the guys that could be the home run threat, the go-to guy, the franchise type of game-changing, game-breaking wide receiver. You have those split ends, the guys that are viewed more traditionally as the sure-handed possession type of guys that are different in style to the flanker. They do different types of things, tend to be a more physical receiver, slower wide receiver, maybe a little bit more precision in terms of their route running, guys like that. So they'll be starters, but they aren't viewed with the same type of upside or same type of potential as the flanker, who is perceived to be more of the go-to big play type of threat. And then traditionally, you would have the slot guys, the number 3 and number 4 wide receivers that could play a role. Some of them might be twitchy athletes that can make big plays happen over the middle. Other guys could be the sure-handed possession guys there as well. It used to be in the past when you would grade the wide receiver position that your flankers would be the guys, then the split ends, and then the slot guys are the guys you get normally in day 3 of the draft. But with the proliferation of the passing game in the league over the past decade or so, and the evolution of offensive play calling and offensive systems in the NFL, I think it really has changed, because now you've gotten to a position where it's all about quickness, it's all about separation, especially with the lack of physical contact that corners can engage in on the outside. You need those guys with some twitch, or you need those guys that can use precise route running to be able to get separation and then do things in the open field. And in some cases, you could look at a slot guy in today's NFL, and if he's able to do great dynamic things out of the slot, he could be every bit as valuable as a flanker. And frankly, when it comes to the position in general, you see some of the wide receivers, even the big name guys, they'll line up all over the field. So they might not have a true role, a true lockdown position. They could play all over the place. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to kind of prioritize or categorize the wide receivers. That's what I try to do. I mean, you look at it, though, you have so many different types of guys. Just because one guy doesn't have blazing speed doesn't mean he can't be a successful NFL wide receiver. But a guy could also have blazing speed and be able to get downfield consistently, but if he can't catch, it doesn't matter. And that's how it is. And sometimes I love evaluating wide receivers, but it can be kind of a mixed bag, because sometimes, it takes all different types. Like I look at Julio Jones. When you saw Julio Jones at Alabama and A.J. Green somewhat similarly at Georgia, you knew coming into that 2011 draft, these guys were both studs. They were going to be big-time playmakers at the NFL level. They were true flankers, number 1 type of wide receivers. And especially when you look at Julio Jones with his size speed combination, he fits that prototype. It's him, it's the Calvin Johnsons of the world. Those guys that you eyeball them, you see them, you know them, and you understand and realize they're going to be studs. But you could have another type of number 1 wide receiver like an Odell Beckham Jr., somebody I was very big on heading into the 2014 draft, and saying if this guy fixes his hands, he's going to be the best receiver out of this draft class by a wide margin. I don't know if it's a super wide margin, but it is a margin, and he is the best receiver out of that draft class. But you're talking about a guy, maybe 6 foot, 190 pounds. So by no means does he fit the size speed combination prototype of a Julio Jones, but an Odell Beckham Jr. is able to get separation on anyone. He surprises you with how well he can break the press, and once he gets into the open field, it's good night, Irene. But then you've got a guy like a 6th-round pick like an Antonio Brown, coming out of the MAC, who is arguably the best wide receiver in football, along with the Julio Joneses and the Odell Beckham Jr.'s of the world. And this guy was a 6th-round pick. And he does it more with initial quickness and route running and great hands. Julian Edelman, 7th-round pick, a slot guy that could do a lot of things, really quick and shifty over the middle of the field. You've got Doug Baldwin, one of the better slot receivers in the NFL. He was an undrafted guy coming out of Stanford. So it can be really hard at times to evaluate the wide receiver position because you can't just fall into the thing of, well, they don't fit the prototype of this, because they could do other things. And if they're in the right system, right situation with the right quarterback, right play caller, they could do some really, really big things. So it can be kind of challenging to evaluate wide receivers sometimes. But ultimately we have to. And again, I'm just doing it generally based off of certain traits and characteristics. For some teams, as I mentioned, with quarterbacks and running backs, certain traits or characteristics could be held in higher esteem or with much greater importance and significance than others. And therefore, as a result, some guys who maybe only grade out as like a mid-second round pick to me may be taken mid to late portion of round one because they have the size-speed combination, or they have incredible catch radius, incredible explosive athleticism. They can make big plays happen. Those type of guys. So I just want to keep that in mind. Just because I grade them somewhere doesn't mean that it's ultimately where they end up being drafted. And it doesn't mean that if a team takes them much higher than I grade them, that it's necessarily a bad pick. It's necessarily a bad move. Because again, I'm doing this in general across the board, not with specific team systems and philosophies and play calling in mind. And if I did that, the grading would be entirely different depending on the team for which I was grading. In terms of the attributes, the traits, the characteristics that I'm going to be looking at, there's a total of 10. It's size, quickness, speed, hands, route running, separation, catch radius, run after catch, durability, and intangibles. Out of those 10, the ones that I tend to emphasize the most, or I think are potentially the most important, are hands, route running, separation, and then catch radius. Especially in today's NFL, where you like to throw jump balls in the red zone, you like to throw the back shoulder fade. You want those guys that can be able to catch the ball if it's thrown anywhere in their ballpark. But first and foremost, to me, the guy's got to be able to catch the ball. It does no good for a guy to get open if he can't catch. Also, it does no good for a guy to have tremendous hands if he always has a defensive back draped over him because he gets no separation whatsoever. And to me, you can have a guy get tremendous separation and have mediocre quickness and less than stellar speed. It happens. It happens quite a bit in the NFL because guys are very precise in and out of their breaks. They have good control of their upper body, and they set up defenders well. They're very good at the double moves. They can do little subtle things to be able to find creases in the zone defense. You have guys that lack explosiveness that can get all types of separation. And I give you a perfect example of that. A guy that didn't measure well coming out of Pittsburgh in terms of his 40 speed, but's been able to separate for 13, 14 years now, and that's Larry Fitzgerald. It's about the way he used his body, his route running, his separation. Now, at the end of the day, even if somebody's draped on him, because it was Larry Fitzgerald, he was still open because he could go up and get the ball at his highest point. He could go win the jump ball. He could get the stop fade. He could get the back shoulder fade. He could do all of these things. He could catch the ball with the defender draped over him. So even when he didn't separate, he still separated. But a guy doesn't have to have explosive quicks and explosive speed necessarily in order to be a big-time NFL wide receiver. It most certainly helps. It really doesn't hurt, but it's not a prerequisite or a requirement. I would value quickness a little bit more than speed, but obviously you would love to have those guys with speed. In terms of this particular draft class, based off of some of the names that I've evaluated so far, you have some guys that have really, really great quicks and very good speed. Some guys not so much. You have some guys that are really good as route runners with pretty expanded route trees and demonstrating ability to separate relatively consistently. Other guys that aren't. Some guys that are really good as pass catchers. Some that are not. So you're going to have to find out. I had a brain fart there for a second. You're going to have to find out ultimately here in the next little bit how I've graded some of the biggest names in this year's wide receiver class. I can tell you right now that I'm not in love with this class. There are a couple prospects, there are two of them specifically, that I favor by a margin over everybody else. Those names may surprise you, but if you watch the film, if you pay attention to me over the years, they may not. So coming up soon, the 6 scouting reports I'm going to have for the wide receivers are going to be Mike Williams, Corey Davis, Dede Westbrook, John Ross, Zay Jones, and Cooper Kupp. I don't know what particular order I'm going to release them, but those are the 6. And in terms of other wide receivers, yes, they'll get covered down the road. But these are the 6 that I'm covering right now. And once I do it, give you the videos. We can debate and discuss them at that time. Let the debate begin.